Hi, and welcome to another episode of White and Woke at Work. I'm here today with Tristan Matheson, and I'm just happy to have him. Tristan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very humbled to be here.
Before we get into it, I'd like to remind all those watching to hit the like button below. Don't forget to subscribe and enjoy all of the episodes in the series. So Tristan, tell me a little bit about yourself and your journey to anti-racism. Have you always been, I guess, active in this movement for social justice?
Yeah, I mean, well, before this COVID, right now it's kind of a platform for online activism. I mean, there is marches and walks and stuff, but with this COVID-19, it's something unseen, unexpected, and crazy. Yeah, I have been, I have done a lot of things, mostly visible minorities, so different visible minorities, not just blacks, but like. Being up here in Canada, I know in the States there's a huge problem with racism with specifically blacks. In Canada, we have that too, but one of the bigger groups that are really kind of pushed down are Indigenous. We have a huge Indigenous population here in Canada. And they're pushed into kind of lands that are on the reserves, basically, that are off the grid. You don't see them, you don't hear them, so they're not there, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I have participated in many different marches and walks and protests. I'd like to speak to a few, one comparatively, actually. So before this COVID-19 hit, in politics, and I follow politics a lot. I follow Canadian politics and American politics. At nighttime, I watch American, and Canadian, I watch in the morning. So I tend to try and be up on things. And what's happening in the States is absolutely scary as hell. But you know what? And here's the thing. Human existence, George Floyd, it was horrible. Okay. Horrible what happened to him. It shouldn't have happened. All the police officers should be incarcerated and charged, which some of them are. I think some of them were dismissed, right?
Yeah.
And that's a crime. Okay. So, but the biggest tool that helped George Floyd, even though he passed, and what a shame it was that, well, they were trying to interfere. People were trying to interfere and help him, right? Which was to no avail. But was cameras. Cameras were there to record it. You could see that incident, okay? So that was the tipping point. However, how many unseen incidents are there in the States? Why does it have to be that it was a police officer kneeling down on a black man on a curb, killing him to make change? Why? What's wrong with our system to allow that to happen, before change is actually occurring?
Yeah.
So getting back to the walks that I did. So Pauline Marois, which was Quebec premier, she wanted to introduce kind of a secular, non-religious province, except for the cross, because it's Catholicism is part of French.
Yeah.
So she automatically banned the hijab. Now that's very, in the papers and stuff, there was a lot about xenophobia and stuff like this, and I was a huge advocate for hijabs. I was actually wearing one, even though I'm not Muslim or Arab by any means, but I wore them because I actually did a dig over in Jordan, and I got to know the culture a little bit, and I brought back a keffiyeh after I was digging there. I did an archaeological dig there, and I would wear it in protest. But I went on a protest, a march against this xenophobia. Thousands of people were there. People from all, and this is in Montreal, okay? This is where I'm based. All kinds of people, like from various races, religions, I'm sure. I don't know, but I'm sure.
Yeah.
And even one of my friends who is Métis, and happens, well, Métis is part of, in the indigenous population.
Yeah.
So we went there, and there were signs, saying like about immigration and immigrants not being allowed their rights and stuff like this. And you know what? That same person that I went with, Métis friend of mine, I went to a protest maybe a week or two earlier, for I Don't Know More. And I Don't Know More is an organization that really kind of highlights the amount of murders and missing Indigenous women there are in Canada, and how there's absolutely nothing being done. Okay.
Yeah. And
I went a couple weeks earlier, and hundreds of people were there. Only a few hundred, maybe 100, maybe just over 100. Not a lot of people were there. Okay. Most were Indigenous. And then you have this contrast. So of xenophobia, which is also super bad. But why? Why is there a different kind of emphasis, right?
Yes.
And grading for this? We're all human beings. And I'd like to actually talk a little bit, and maybe if you could allow me to talk a little bit about the word race. Because race is an interesting concept. This is coming back from my communication media studies. Okay, race is a very interesting word concept. Okay, it's symbolic, because when you talk about race, you think about like, different colors, right? Your skin, your outer organ, your membrane, right? Okay. But if you're talking about scientific fact, and there's articles about this, how thousands of years ago, when human beings existed, and we were tribes and moving and migrating into different environmental locations within the globe, our skin adapted to the sun.
Right.
So in essence, we're all connected in some sort of way. Yes. It's not, so the whole race, and identifying somebody is absurd if you look at it in a scientific way.
Absolutely. Right? Yep.
Now, and I have a little side story to that, because my family and I, and we knew a lot of people in Vermont. I love the state of Vermont. We knew a lot of people in Vermont, and the church that my parents would go to was a Unitarian Universalist church. Okay. And the Unitarian Universalist church is kind of, well, it's a church. It's more of a community. Because you can be Catholic, you can be Mormon, you could be Wiccan, you can be a Quaker, you could be an atheist, and you can still be part of that church. Okay. It was one of the first churches that recognized same-sex marriage, actually. Okay. And so we had a lot of family friends there, and the friends that we had quite often adopted kids, and so there was kids of all different colors in the congregation. And one of my mother's really, really close friend adopted a daughter. Okay. And she had her genes tested, like the genetic testing of where her origins came from, just for her interest's sake, what the heck. Yeah. Now her skin was as dark as coal, like a black. Okay. And when she got the test back, you know where her ancestors came from or originated from?
Where?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, it could be anywhere. Um, I don't know. I'm at a loss. Where?
Italy.
Oh, that's not surprising.
Italy.
It's not surprising, yeah.
So let's think about race, right? And we're talking about culture, okay? We think of Italy, we're thinking of like more olive skin.
Yeah, yeah.
But Italy was where, her roots came from, or a majority of her roots, a higher chunk of where her roots came from, And so that kind of speaks more, again, to the fact of human migration over the years, where we moved, how our body adapted, what happened, and so I thought that was an interesting facet. But right now, for I guess going back to your question of what are you doing and stuff, I think right now with the COVID, I think the biggest thing that I've been doing online more so is trying to get into more conferences. So I'm actually later on today, I'm going to be part of a D&I roundtable.
Okay.
I'm going to be talking at a conference next week. It's an HR, so it's more in D&I business. Which D&I in business is also very interesting, because if you're talking about big business,
yes,
you're talking about businesses that affect and help communities. Now, if you're in a big business, there's a couple reasons why you do this, okay?
mm-hmm.
Corporate social responsibility, right? Rating, PR, okay? But if you're a company with any values and an inclusive company who genuinely cares about communities, then not only do you participate in these events and support these organizations, but you help them grow.
Of course.
You consult them even and say, like, for instance, and this kind of goes back to my former position at Air Canada. I was lucky enough I was in HR, I was diversity and development specialist. And I worked very closely, strategically, very closely with community partnerships.
Okay.
And I did this because I knew how many events we were doing throughout the year. We did a lot. The community partnerships is very active at Air Canada. I don't think a lot of people know that, but year round, it was very active, over 200 events per year.
Wow.
Okay. But the thing is, it wasn't just about sponsoring, for instance, like an art exhibit at the National Art Gallery of Canada for Indigenous work,
right,
worldwide, globally. Or, sponsoring a foundation that helps people with AIDS. It was about making sure those events are accessible to others.
Yep.
So people can, for instance, one of the events that I went to, unfortunately, one of the events that I went to, and this was an unfortunate story, but one of the events that I went to, it was an opening event. It had happened to be an opening event of an arts space, and the space, the event didn't have a room or placement for people in wheelchairs, and there was live performances coming in,
mm-hmm.
and unfortunately there wasn't an elevation, so you couldn't like see down. And the sponsors had almost like front row seats, right? Like we got front row seats so we could see the performance because we had helped, bring the financially support and help the event. And you know what? When I went, and there was a woman, it was an elderly woman, but it was a woman in a wheelchair. I said, you know what? You're going to take my seat. So I made sure that she took that seat so she could see that show, because that, unfortunately, we didn't catch it in time, but that space didn't have a space for people with some sort of physical disability or differential mobility. It's like, right. So diversity and inclusion is not just about, and in my role, it wasn't just about trying to make sure everybody was heard and feel respected and safe, and policies were met and made, initiatives were were brought in to help make the culture more inclusive, but also to push and help support and consult externally partnerships that we were with to make them better, and have like translators for people who are deaf, who can't, who cannot hear, or like, so that's the responsibility. And that's why I guess when I'm going to these conferences and I'm going to these meetings and I'm going to these talks, this is what I'm pushing. This is what I'm trying to get across. And I'm trying to get across also the value, because without executive buy-in, you don't get, a certain amount of funding to work with and mold and help the communities you need to further make changes.
So where does that sense of responsibility come from for you, Tristan? Like what? I guess what makes you care? There's a lot of people.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I've over the course of many years, I'm a bit of, as you might notice, I love to talk. I'm a social butterfly. Okay. I love people. I love all different kinds of people, from different backgrounds, religions. I even took part of a fatur, and during Ramadan. I guess it's because of the plethora of people that I've been exposed to, and people that have touched me in my life, and there's a lot of people that I'm friends with that struggle. I have a friend who is autistic. He has Asperger's. I have a friend who is deaf. I have a friend who has learning disability, dyslexia. And I have tons of friends that are part of the LGBT community. I am myself, actually. I like to call us the hidden minority. So we're talking about the visible minority, like skin color, right. The outer membrane, right? And I think I'm more specialized, I guess, in gender, specific to my personal state, because I researched a lot about it. Actually, I researched a lot about it for my own being, and trying to understand my own self. And I have the fortunate capability of sharing that narrative with others. So just to be open, I happen to be a trans man, and trying to research and educate. And I mean, I started transitioning, I guess maybe 10 years ago, 11 years ago now. So that's before that was in the media. Like, it wasn't even talked about, like it wasn't even discussed, And so I had to do a lot of research, a lot of reflecting. And I was fortunate enough that and even to this day, I'm fortunate enough to be able to share that narrative and share that research and share that knowledge with others, because some trans people are they have gender identity dysphoria, and it's very, very high. And so some people, not all, who have transitioned, they have a hard time even recognizing their former self or what they biologically were, right? So so I mean, well, first off, and here it is, I don't have to, this is the thing, I shouldn't have to be trans, or I shouldn't have to be Black, or I shouldn't have to have a disability to want to change society for diversity and inclusion. And I emphasize inclusion first off, because diversity is easy, inclusion is not, right? But I happen to have that personal insight. I've done a lot of research with my transition, because there wasn't a lot right out there 11 years ago when I was first started transition, right? 11 years ago. So I did a lot of, I was actually, this is what is called a patient partner. I learned this from one of my friends who happens to be in medical school right now. So what a patient partner did, and this is interesting, what a patient partner did is they have a doctor, and you basically, the doctor's never dealt with a case, or the endocrinologist that I had, okay, she had never, ever worked with somebody who's transitioned. So it was new to her. Obviously, it was new to me. So I did a lot of research into the surgeries: metoidioplasty, phyloplasty, top surgery, hormone therapy, replacement, therapy, and all this other jazz. What you go through, the steps, and so because she had that gap of lack of knowledge there, and I had a little bit to give, I could bring in the kind of the narratives and the social and what I researched online, and she could add her medical, So we were kind of like going back and forth, So it was a really interesting relationship I had with my endocrinologist. But I think, I mean, if I weren't trans, I'd still be interested in this space, because I really believe in equality. I really think it's ridiculous how where we act as human beings, frankly, um, whether it be human rights, whether it be environment. There was a really interesting book called The Short Progress of History. And it talks about how social patternings happen. I'm sure we can clearly see this in the States, right, with the whole Civil War and people saying, oh my gosh, it's going to be another Civil War too,
Right.
With this devastating things that are happening in the States. I mean, it's kind of, and now with Trump out of office, thank goodness, that's all I gotta say about that. And I hope he gets charged. He's being there's possibility of criminal charges there for him. But we keep reverting back to certain things that have already happened, and why are we doing that? It's the same with the environment, right? They give an example in the book of Easter Island. Human beings, they basically used up all the resources and then went extinct. Like, and it's like constant, back and forth. Same, I mean, it goes the same with how we treat each other, and race, religion is also a big one. I gotta tell you, and here's a little example. It was my mother. She told me this. This was 9/11 happened, right? And after 9/11 happened, there was a lot of hatred towards Muslims, Arabs, right? And my mother, close to after it happened, she was at a laundromat doing, I guess the comforter, it must have been the comforter or something for a house, and she, in the laundromat there was a TV, and it was showing basically the 9/11 and what happened, right? And the airplanes going in, and there was a couple there, and they happened to be of Arab descent. And they looked at her with the face was like of guilt.
Is your mother Arab?
My mother is not.
Okay.
My mother was, well, I don't know, actually. Okay, so here it is. I have no idea. I mean, like, if you were to judge her on what she looks like, she had white skin. She was born in Montreal, but she found out she was adopted at age 49. Okay. So I don't know half my background. I could be anything under the sun, So, and she could be anything under the. Pardon?
Oh, you should do one of yourself.
Yeah, I should. It would be interesting.
I'm asking only because in your story you expressed that they were looking at your mother in this funny way, and I was trying to get at, was it because of Islamophobia or?
No, it was because they were embarrassed about what happened, and they saw the TV and they were embarrassed. They were embarrassed because they felt a connection to it because of the terrorists, and this whole kind of profiling of terrorists and how they're Arab and they're Islam and they're
Okay, so these were potentially Islamic Arabs that were
potentially, but they basically they looked at her with kind of guilt, with like embarrassment, and my mother after that, I mean, she said she looked at them and did nothing. She said nothing, and after she left, and like she told me, she's like, I did a mistake. She said, I should have gone up to them and hugged them and said, you know what, it's okay, it's not you. It's not the culture, it's not you, it's like a sect, it's like it's a branch, it's extremists, okay?
Right.
It's not people who are, all Arabs aren't terrorists, and it's not their fault,
Did you grow up seeing your mom, expressing these views of openness and kindness toward other groups? Is that the type of upbringing?
Oh yeah, oh yes. Okay, so I was brought up in Stratford, Ontario. I don't know if you know anything about Stratford, Ontario.
Yeah, I do.
But oh, you do. The land of Justin Bieber. It's also the
good theater.
Amazing Stratford Festival Theater, yes. So I was lucky. I was lucky because I was in a very open, it was very English though, very British. You wouldn't, a lot of rainbows, very LGBT friendly. Actually, there was a Lithuanian, one of my friends was Lithuanian, and she came in, she's like, the first thing I noticed about Stratford are all the rainbows everywhere. I was like, I know. It's filled with actors and actresses and artists and musicians, and just a great cultural experience, really. Yeah. Even in, actually, funny enough, and this was dating myself a little bit, when I was in kindergarten. Bedford, it was a Bedford school. My kindergarten teacher was dating a black man, and nothing was said, nothing ever. He was actually one of the favorite teachers of the school, because what he would do? He'd give us Jolly Ranchers at recess. So we loved Mr. Henry. But there was never any kind of racial profiling, or like not in my family, not how we were raised. We didn't we saw past the membrane. We didn't even think of the membrane, the outer membrane. Everybody's just a human being, Yeah.
Then when, I guess, if that is the case, then when did you kind of realize that, wait a second, the outer membrane of people's skin is actually, affecting their social standing and access to justice and equality? Like, when did that kind of connection kind of come in for you?
That's a really good question. Actually, it came in for me when I became old enough to really start educating, reading the news. I really got into the news, see what was going on YouTube. I guess when the internet really came into play.
Yeah, you weren't seeing that in your environment in Montreal. Your school was pretty diverse.
Well, in Stratford, it was in Stratford. In Stratford, it was very Caucasian. Mm-hmm. I think it's because I'm not sure.
I mean, that's just Stratford generally. That's not
Stratford generally, yeah. But even if it wasn't, I don't think it would have been an issue in Stratford. Montreal is very multicultural, multilingual. Yes. There tends to be groupings though in the city, which is interesting. So, like, for instance, even language, West Side is English, and mm-hmm. East Side is French. You have little pockets of, you have the Chinatown, and you have like more Italian in like Jean Talon, Italian kind of area, and then you have you have little cultural pockets, which is really kind of cool, because like if you ever want to go and get some like really good Chinese or really good Italian or really good Moroccan food. You know where to go, you know? In school, I guess with the programs that I have been in, my master's, communication media studies, my first master's I did, there were some colored students. It was never an issue because the building that I was working in was communication and journalism. So often you'd get these newscasters and broadcasters and journalists who are doing these documentaries and saying, what's going on, and fighting for social justice were in that building, you know. So so that was never ever, you know, an issue or talked about. My second master's, we had a lot of international students. It was educational technology. So again, we had a mix of different races, a mix of different genders, mix of different knowledge and experience. So again, nothing of that sort. The biggest, I think, in Montreal that I've noticed for race was during, I guess, and I'm sure it happens. Oh, I'm sure in Montreal it happens, just like everywhere else. But from my experience, the only thing racially that I've seen was the xenophobia against the Islams, and you know, and and Indigenous. Indigenous is always, and it has for many years been a stealthy, not talked about problem. These residential schools, you're starting to see documentaries on residential schools and what they did to kids and ripped them away from their culture and their parents, and wouldn't allow them to even get to know their upbringing or their culture or their background or anything, you know, and would beat them and just were horrible to them. I mean, it's devastatingly awful.
Has your work been focused on the Indigenous community?
Yeah. So actually, before I left Air Canada, it's because of this COVID. It's the only reason why I left Air Canada was this COVID. The poor airline industry is getting a kicking. So before I left, one of the executive orders or mandates that I was passed down to or given was a very interesting project, and it's called the PAR certification for different businesses and organizations. And this is a run in with an organization called the CCAB, which is a Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business. And what it does is it basically vets and evaluates not necessarily what the organization is doing just outside the company, but how employees do they feel recognized? Do they feel included? Do they feel part of the family? Do they have some kind of outlet or support system or employee resource group to go to if they need help? And so you first do an internal evaluation, and then you have basically somebody from the CCAB that comes and evaluates, and doesn't just ask the executives or management, but reaches out to the workers, you know, like everybody from all different branches, doesn't matter, right? And so I thought that was a brilliant, beautiful way to make sure that a space is inclusive. And with that model and their model, I'm kind of promoting CCAB, but with their model, it's actually very adaptable to visible minorities, to LGBT, to all different people with differential abilities, you know, and you could do that very easily. And so anyway, I was really honored to have been given that. Unfortunately, it didn't come to fruition because I was laid off because of the COVID. But you know, the best and most beautiful thing is that it came from an executive. An executive wanted that. You know, it wasn't just, you know, from the grassroots up, it was top down. And that's the thing. You have to have the leaders of the organization. You can have grassroots movements. I think they're fantastic. I think it really pushes the top to actually take action.
Absolutely.
But you really, really, really have to have buy-in from top down when it comes to business. But when you start seeing leaders take action on their own volition and say, listen, guys, we need to make sure that our company is thoroughly inclusive like that, that is when you know you're a successful company.
For sure. You're speaking my language. So what's next for you, Tristan? Are you just, I guess, job hunting and going to take your activism back into somebody else's workplace, or will perhaps Air Canada have you back?
Oh, big questions. Yeah, I am currently seeking. I'm, as I said, I'm talking at conferences. I'm trying to volunteer or do anything I possibly can to help. I'm going to be talking at Gay and Gray, which is an organization that talks with elderly LGBT communities in Montreal. And so I'm doing the best that I can right now. But as for Air Canada, that is TBD. Unfortunately, I don't know when their business will start flying again. You might say, because of the lack of well, it's it's a difficult time. People with COVID, and COVID, you really shouldn't be traveling, but that's kicking that the airline is going to kill the airline industry. So I mean, I'm sure, like like my boss, my director that I was reporting to, he said, he knows why I was there and what I was doing and what my performance was, and I'm sure he would have me back in a flash if they could.
Yeah.
But they can't, unfortunately. And even when I was, it was awful when I was laid off. The first thing they said, "This is not based on your performance." And I was like, yeah, well, but that's to keep as Kaylin, the CEO, said, they're basically putting the airline industry into kind of a sort of a coma, and that's to and they hate laying off people. I'm sure they hate laying off people, but they're putting the organization into a coma because they're trying to preserve the business so that when COVID does go away, I mean, one of the things Kaylin was adamant about was hiring people that were there before, and rehiring people.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, I
But
appreciate
we'll
you.
see.
I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Good luck to you in your next endeavor, whatever it might be.
I love challenges. So yeah.
And I wanted to thank you for coming on so much and sharing your journey and all the things that you're doing to make things better for historically marginalized groups. It's really meaningful. And I thank you for sharing your personal story with us as well. We'll see you next time on another episode of White and Woke at Work. And if you need to reach Tristan, how can they reach you? Are you on?
I'm on LinkedIn. I have Twitter, but I'm more active on LinkedIn. And yeah.
So it's Tristan Matheson on LinkedIn.
Yep. Yeah.
That's Matheson.
You bet.
And I'm Janelle Benjamin, founder and CEO of All Things Equitable. And don't forget to subscribe below, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Tristan, for coming on.
Thank you.